In the midst of the ovens, six large masses elevated from 1,300 to 1,700 feet each above the old level of the plain sprung up from a chasm. The most elevated of these enormous masses was the great volcano of Uralo. It was continually burning and had thrown up from the north side an immense quantity of scorified and basaltic lavas containing fragments of primitive rocks. These great eruptions of the central volcano continued till the month of February in 1760. In the following years, they became gradually less frequent. The Indians, frightened at the horrible noises of the new volcano, abandoned at first all the villages situated within 7 or 8 leagues of the plain of Yarlow. They became by degrees, however, accustomed to the terrific spectacle, and having returned to their cottages, they advanced towards the mountains of Aguasarco, Santa Ynez, to admire the streams of fire discharged from the infinity of great and small volcano apertures. The roofs and the houses of Querétaro were then covered with ashes at a distance of more than 48 leagues, in a straight line from the scene of the explosion. Although the subterraneous fire appeared to Humboldt far from violent, and the mopes and the great volcano appeared to be covered with vegetables, he found the ambient air heated to such a degree by the accustomations of the small ovens that their thermometer at a great distance from the surface and in the shade rose as high as 109. This fact appeared to prove that there was no exaggeration in the accounts of several old Indians who affirmed that for many years after the eruption, the plains of Uralo, even at a great distance from the scene of the explosion, were uninhabitable from the excessive heat which prevailed in them. Humboldt was shown near the Cerro de Santa Ynez, the rivers of Cumana and San Pedro. These streams disappeared in the night of the 29th of September, 1759, but at a distance of 6,500 feet further west in the tract which was the theater of the convulsion. He saw two rivers bursting through the Aguila Celios vault of the ovens, of the appearance of mineral waters in which the thermometer rose to 126 degrees. The Indians continued to give them the names of San Pedro and Cumana, while in several parts of the Malays great masses of water were still heard to run from the east to west. In the opinion of the Indians, these extraordinary transformations of the surface of the earth raised up and burst by the volcanic fire, and the mountains of scoria and ashes heaped together were the work of the monks, the greatest, no doubt, which then they produced in 2 hemispheres. In the cottage which Humboldt occupied in the plains of Yarlow, his Indian host related to him that in 1759 Capuchin missionaries came to preach at the plantation of San Pedro, and not having met with a favorable reception, perhaps not having got so good a dinner as they expected, they poured out the most horrible and unheard of imprecations against the then beautiful and fertile plain, and prophesied that in the first place that the plantation would be swallowed up by the flames rising out of the earth, and that afterwards the ambient air would cool to such a degree that the neighboring mountains would forever remain covered with snow and ice. The former of these maledictions having already procured such fatal effects, the Indians contemplated in the increasing coolness of the volcano the sinister presage of a perpetual winter. After visiting the volcano of Yarlow, and descending on the 19th of September, 250 feet in the burning crater of the central cone, Humboldt returned to the capital. The arrangement of his botanical and geological collections and the regulation of the calculations of his barometric and trigonometric measurements detained him and bomb plant there until the beginning of January 1804. It would have been difficult to have found anywhere, least of all in the Dulce Norte of Mexico, two busier men than the travelers were at this time. They were up to their eyes in work. Humboldt surrounded with rocks, ores, minerals, observations, maps, and road books, and bomb plant with thousands of strange plants, many of them unknown to botanists, but busy as they were, the travelers found time to mingle in the gay society of the capital, and to make short excursions in the neighborhood. Having made several journeys to the northern and southern parts of the country, Humboldt now determined to see some of the eastern portions. Lying along the Gulf of Mexico, so in company with bomb plant, he started off in January for Zapala and Veracruz. On their way, the travelers stopped at the volcanoes of Iztaccíhuatl and Popocatépetl and the pyramid of Cholula. This famous pyramid, the largest in all Mexico, stood in the vicinity of the old city of Cholula in the Indigency of Puebla. The inhabitants of this city, so writes Cortez in the third letters to the Imperial Charles V, are better clothed than any we have hitherto seen. People in easier circumferences wear cloaks above their dress. These cloaks differ from those of Africa, for they have pockets through the cut cloth and fringes of the same. The environs of the city are very fertile and well cultivated. Almost all the fields may be watered, and the city is much more beautiful than all those in Spain. I can assure your highness that from the top of a mosque I reckoned more than 400 towers all of mosques. The number of the inhabitants is so great that there is not an inch of ground uncultivated, and yet in several places the Indians experience the effects of famine, and there are many beggars who ask alms from the rich in the streets, houses, and marketplaces, as is done by the merchants in Spain and other civilized countries. When the pyramid of Cholula was in its prime, its summit was covered with an altar dedicated to Quetzalcoatl, the god of air. He was a white and bearded man like the Bochia, of whom he is spoken of in our description of the falls of Tecadema. He was a high priest of Tula, legislator and chief of the religious sect which inflicted on themselves the most cruel penances. He introduced the custom of piercing their lips and ears and lacerating the rest of their body with prickles of the agave leaves or the thorns of the cactus, and of putting reeds into the wounds in order that the blood might be seen to trickle more copiously. The reign of Quetzalcoatl, strange to say, was a golden age for the people of Anahuac. Men and animals lived in peace. The earth brought forth without culture the fullest of harvests, and the air was filled with innumerable birds, of whom it was difficult to say which was the most admired. The beauty of their plumage or the sweetness of their song, such a blessed epoch, could not and did not last long. The great Tezcatlipoca offered Quetzalcoatl a rare beverage which rendered him immortal, and inspired him with a taste for traveling. He started off at once for the distant country of Tlalpan. The inhabitants of Cholula, though whose territory he passed, offering him the reins of government. He remained among them 20 years. He taught them to cast metals, ordered fasts of 8 days, regulated the intercalations of their year, preached peace to them, and would permit no further offerings to the divinity than the first fruits of the harvest. From Cholula, he proceeded to the mouth of the river Guasacaloco, where he disappeared, declaring, however, that he would return soon to govern the Cholulas again and renew their happiness. The unhappy Montezuma thought he recognized the posterity of this saint and the soldiers of Cortez. We know by our books that said he, in his first interview with the Spanish general, that myself and those who inhabit this country are not natives but strangers who came from a great distance. We know that the chief who led our ancestors hitherto returned for a certain time to his primitive country, and thence came back to seek those who were established here. He found them married to the women of this land and living in the cities which they had built. Our ancestors hearkened not to their ancient father, and he returned alone. We have always believed that his descendants would one day come to take possession of this country. Since you arrived from that region where the sun rises, and as you assure me, you have long known us, I cannot doubt but that the king who sends you is our natural master. So far, Cortez in his first letter, how far he and his soldiers resembled Quetzalcoatl, the Mexican Prince of Peace, the readers of Mexican history must judge for themselves. Cholula in his glory was one of the Delphinian values, the Palestines, the Meccas of the mind. It was the holy city of the ancient Meccas who resorted thither from the most distant parts of the empire. Its streets were picturesque with the long train of their processions. Its winds were jubilant in with their barbaric music. With noise and pomp, they marched to the great pyramid whose summit was crowned with the perpetual flame that rose from the temple of Quetzalcoatl. Climbing the steps that led from the terrace to terrace, they reached the shrine and worshipped the image of a god. It was a monstrous idol of stone, holding in one hand a shield covered with hieroglyphs, and in the other a jeweled scepter. Upon its head was a mitre with plumes. Its neck was encircled with a collar of gold, while from its ears hung pendants of turquoise. Glory to Quetzalcoatl, the mighty god of the air. But to return from the past to the present, from tradition to fact, the perpendicular height of the pyramid when Humboldt and Bonpland saw it was 177 feet. The horizontal breadth of its base was 1,400 feet. It had 4 sides facing the cardinal points, and as many terraces altogether. It covered with a space of 45,000 square feet. They had a magnificent view from its summit, seeing at one glance 4 mountains: Popsicle, Izculatl, the peak of Orizaba, and the Soria de Sacal, famous for its tempests. 3 of these mountains were higher than Mont Blanc. 2 were burning volcanoes. The pyramid of Cholula was built of unbaked bricks, alternating with layers of clay. Humboldt was assured by the Indians that the inside was hollow. During the abode of Cortez at Mexico, their ancestors, they said, concealed in the body of the pyramid a considerable number of warriors for the purpose of falling suddenly on the Spaniards. the material of which the pyramid was built, and the silence of historians on so singular a circumstance, led Humboldt to doubt the truth of the tradition. It was certain, however, that in this pyramid there were several cavities, which had been used as sculptures for the natives. A short time previous, the old road which ran from Puebla to Mexico was changed, and in tracing the new one from the first terrace was cut through, so that an eighth part remained isolated like a heap of bricks. In making this opening, a square house was discovered in the interior of the pyramid. This house contained 2 skeletons, several idols in basalt, and a great number of vases, curiously varnished and painted. There was no outlet. To whom did these vases and idols belong? Of whom were those skeletons the remains? Humboldt conjectured that the pyramid was built by prisoners taken by the Chileans in their wars with the neighboring nations, and that these were skeletons of some unfortunate slaves who had been shut up in the interior of the pyramid to perish. It seems to us, however, that they were the remains of some important state personages, condemned for some reason, which must ever remain unknown, to die in this horrible manner. Might not the king of the Toltecs, like other civilized barbarian of later times, have had his man in the iron mask, a wife false to him, a daughter loving below herself,